Hello and welcome to Perfectly Paranormal, episode 52. My name's Annaschmidt, and I'm here every week to share with you true paranormal encounters and information about devils, demons, and dark energy beings that no one else talks about. And today I'm speaking with Liz Entin. Now, Liz is a science-minded, self-proclaimed skeptic. And Liz explores grief, healing, parapsychology, and also gathers evidence of the afterlife through researching with others who delve into the survival of consciousness after death. Now, today Liz also shares some of her paranormal experiences with her dad, who was getting her attention with, of all things, feathers. And she also shares about one of her beloved pets who visited her from the other side, and also how she practiced mediumship one day and was completely blown away by her accuracy. So let's get into our interview with Liz. Welcome, Liz.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really happy to be here.
Would you like to tell us some of your background? Because I'm really fascinated to hear about the information that you've gathered about parapsychology and about the afterlife.
Definitely. So, touch a background about me. I'm very skeptical. I'm very science-minded. I'm an atheist. I never thought there was anything like an afterlife or anything to hauntings, ghosts, any of that paranormal. I just thought it was complete nonsense. And sadly, in 2015, my dad passed away. And I took what I say is just a shot in the dark and decided to see if there was any scientific evidence of an afterlife or survival of consciousness in some way. And oh my God, I mean, this was not an overnight process, but the vast body of research, it is astronomical and it is solid and it is science-based and it is backed by data. I can start with cases of kids with past life memories. I will start with that because that is the very first thing I found. So the very first researchers and research body I found were the late Dr. Ian Stevenson and then Dr. Jim Tucker, who took over his research. They are child psychiatrists and they study cases of kids with past life memories from a very database perspective. And they're also professors at the University of Virginia. And I found a whole department at the University of Virginia called the Division of Perceptual Studies. And that's where Dr. Jim Tucker does his research. There's Dr. Bruce Grayson, who studies people who've had near-death experiences, which is when people pass away and come back. Then they report just phenomenal stories that have this very beautiful component, like seeing deceased loved ones and going to other realms. But they also post what they refer to in the research as veridical NDEs, and people who will report these highly spiritual aspects also report veridical aspects at times, which means it can be verified. They will, having been completely unconscious, say they were floating above their bodies, and they verify what the doctors said, what the nurses said, which doctors and nurses were there. They sometimes say they floated to their home and heard the conversations going on in their home. So there is something going on. And in the cases of kids with past life memories, these kids will start talking about another life. And Dr. Jim Tucker will study that and at times match it to a person. But about 1,000 have been what he calls solved. So here are these, what at first you think are anomalies, and you start delving in, and it's so far from an anomaly. And since, you want to hear a lot of personal experiences, first, when I started researching Dr. Tucker's research, it caused me to rethink a few things from my life that I would have never thought of related to past lives. But I remember when I was, I guess, like about it was under 5 years old. And what's interesting is all of Dr. Tucker's cases, the kids all tend to have these strong memories and fear reactions to things that don't make sense in this lifetime, related often to how they passed in their previous life. And they tend to forget these stories or stop having the reactions around 5 years old. And I remember when I was really little, under 5, my parents had this heating pad, and it was like just this sort of like faded blue floral, kind of not the prettiest of materials. And I would see that material and I would freak out and scream. I remember crying, asking them not to use it. And I didn't have the vocabulary that you start to get when you were older, but it was this visceral reaction of picturing like deathbeds and dying in a hospital and hospital gowns. And it had that look to it. And it just had that visceral feeling to it. And I'd never been in a hospital aside from when I was born. We hadn't had deaths in my family that I was present for. People had passed before I was born. So there was just no logical, linear reason that I would have this visceral reaction. And as I talk to friends who've studied this, it seems most of us have something like this. It's just in our culture, we don't even think to associate it that way. And a big thing that the children say in the cases that Dr. Tucker studies is when I was big. And they talk about their previous life. And then I have some friends, in fact, another friend who researches this, I remember once telling me that he and his sister started talking about when they were big. And he remembers feeling so confused because he had memories of being big. And he was like, wait, but you start small and get bigger. Why do I remember being big? And so it's just lots of, little fragmented memories that most of us have that aren't strong enough for Dr. Jim Tucker to ever, or Dr. Jim Matlock is another researcher. It's not strong enough for them to come out and study them, but it seems to be this consistency. And I find that so fascinating. When you start studying this research, you start applying it to personal aspects as well as just, this is some powerful research.
Now, here's a past life experience with a twist that you might find interesting. I had a client within the last couple of years who had seen other energy clearers, couldn't solve her problem. So she came to me and I said to her, look, I'm going to work with you until we find the cause of this issue. And it took me 2 months to pinpoint what the issue was. So I looked at doing all my usual energy clearing that I do for people through their physical body, organs, chakras, meridian lines, and energy field. And it would slightly improve her problem because she was getting mind-splitting headaches. And she said, look, it's better, but it's still there. And she said, some days are worse than others. One day I was sitting there thinking about her, looking at a photo of her, and I'm like, there's something I'm not pinpointing here. And I heard in my head, you need to go back further. So I needed to go back into her past lives to work out where the migraines were coming from. And since we discovered what it was, so again, I'm staring at her photo because I work with people remotely and they'll send me just a selfie so I can talk to their image and their energy as I'm doing the work. What I saw, which I'm not going to describe, was very graphic. But if you think mind-splitting headaches, she'd been a warrior. She had died in such a way is that she'd acquired a head injury which was so severe, and you just think mind-splitting headaches. You just put those two things together, so I don't have to actually say it. Is that when I pinpointed that, within 3 days, her headaches disappeared, and she hasn't had one since.
That's amazing. That's so fascinating.
It was past life connected. And now I find that if I work with clients and they're like, look, I've still got this problem. If it's not medical, and it's not a mental health issue, it's got to be energetic. So I'll go back now. If it's not coming from this lifetime, it has to come from previous lifetimes. I am such a believer in this with you that what we've done in our past lives can affect us in this lifetime.
That seems to be what the research says. And I mean, even in Dr. Tucker's strongest case, the James Leininger case, which is a very long, in-depth case, I recommend you read it. I'm not going to go into it much here. Except that the little boy had terrors of dying in a plane crash, kept screaming, plane on fire. After lots of research, they found out and matched him to a previous personality who'd passed away as a World War II fighter pilot. And the people who'd been in his Air Force troop and his sister from his previous life were alive. Not all of them from the troop, but quite a few. And his sister was still living. They were elderly. And he went and met them and they shared memories and conversations. It's remarkable.
I don't even have words for it, and I'm not very often without words. It is just so unbelievable that people can remember things that they've not experienced in this lifetime. So there has to be something in it. There has to be something in it. Now, you mentioned earlier that your dad passed away. Have you had any communications with him? Has he shown himself to you? How do you experience the paranormal in your life?
Oh, I would love to. So aside from medium readings, I had a few weird things from him too. I got some signs. I also saw him once very early on in my research. I'd started to read about that happening, but I was still so unsure what I thought about it and still so shocked by everything. I didn't get to do what I wanted to do, what I would probably do now. Like I saw him and I just jumped and I was like, what the, like, what? I was just so startled that I didn't get to calmly engage, which is where you get the most reactions. And so then he just disappeared. And I wasn't scared. I was really happy, but I was just startled. And I so wish I'd been able to be like, hi, I have a question. Tell me something that I don't know that mom would know, so I get some evidence. Now, I got some amazing signs, and I'll tell my favorite one. It's in my book, but I'm going to tell it again. Here you go. And so I disguise it a little bit in my book. I disguise what his favorite color is because I still get medium readings. And if there's too much out there, I can't evidentially evaluate readings. So I call them green feathers. It's not so far off. So green was his favorite color. And I'm walking along and I see a green feather very early in my research. And I'd been reading then quite a bit about how feathers can be a sign, which is called an apport, which means they show up from another dimension or somehow they show up. We can't really explain why. So I see a green feather. I'm like, that's not the most common thing. And I was like, that's a little weird. Okay, I'll consider it. So I take it home. I'm like, I'll put it to the side. I'm not going to really think much of it, but I'm not going to completely dismiss it. Fast forward about 2 years later, I'm further along in my research. At this point, I'm volunteering for an organization called Forever Family Foundation. I still volunteer with them. They're wonderful for anyone in grief and anyone curious about all of this. They have a scientific advisory board. Dr. Jim Tucker is actually one of the people who is on that board. They have fascinating scientists and parapsychologists and researchers. And they use science-based testing to certify mediums. I can get into some fascinating experiences with mediums, but I'll finish the sign story. So one of the mediums who's wonderful, her name's Gina Simone. I had a reading with her fairly early on. And I say to her in the end, she's like, do you have any questions? And, for me, I used this to get evidence. So I said, so did my dad send me any signs? She said, well, I don't like to answer that question because then you get attached to this one sign and you don't look at all the others that might be signs. She's like, let's say you wanted me to say green feather. I was like, Gina, it's a green feather. She's like, what? And that is part one. Story is not even done. Then, so fast forward like the next year, and it's one of the Forever Family Foundation events. They do grief retreats and afterlife and mediumship conventions and conferences. And I'm at one of the grief retreats and Gina is one of our mediums. And this is before TikTok blew up. So it's little mini videos for Instagram. So I'm getting little videos of all the mediums and I haven't had a chance to get to Gina. And Gina it's the end of the weekend. Gina left a little early and I just felt so bad. So I said to my mentor, her name's Fran, and she was like a second mom to me, and said to her, Fran, I feel so bad. I got all the mediums, but I didn't get Gina. She said, just email Gina. Can you do this online and get the same like little video? Fine. It's solved. I wouldn't normally think about it. For some reason, it starts obsessing in my head the way a song gets stuck in your head. So I'm taking the train home. And on loop in my head is, I feel so bad I missed Gina. That was so amazing when she got the green feather. This is obsessively playing in my head the whole time. Even though I emailed Gina, she writes back, no problem, let's pick a date. You would think I'd forget about it. It's just playing the whole train ride home. When I get back to the city, I go home to my parents' place because my mom was babysitting my animals and I'm tired. I decide to sleep there. And then the next morning, I take my animals to go back to my own apartment. And the subway ride back to my own apartment, I'm obsessing even more. But like, when you just cannot get something stuck out of your mind. But it had shortened to where it was like, instead of like, I feel so bad about Gina, that was so great. It was just, Gina got the green feathers. Gina got the green feathers. As I'm getting closer to my apartment and I'm just hearing in my head, green feathers, green feathers. I'm walking up my stairs, green feathers. Go sit on my bed. I open my laptop. I'm like, I have to actually do work for my other job. And it won't stop. It's like green feathers. I can't even focus. I look over, there's a pile of green feathers sitting in the middle of my floor. But I was just like, what? And so I photographed them, emailed them to Fran. I said, this just happened. Do you see these? And she did. And then I was one short of my lucky number. And I sent a message to my dad just because like I have to keep getting more evidence. I'm like, well, wow, it'd be amazing if it was my lucky number. The next week I found one more. And then that's it. And I have a little pile. I'm going to send them in. I just found out about a university that studies apports and I'm going to send some of them in. And I was just like, that was unbelievable, especially like the combination of hearing green feather in my head and then seeing them. I still get chills when I talk about it.
So do you think that was your dad talking to you?
I think that's a really strong probability. And that's really big coming from me because I question everything.
I can absolutely relate to that. As you were sharing your experience, I remembered a very similar experience. I got one feather. My mum was in hospital, so her house was locked up, and I would go over every couple of days just to do a walk around, just to check, turn the lights on and off of a night time, to make it look like someone's living there. My father passed away in the house. So I'm doing the walk around the house, and I come to the spot where he passed away. And there is a very large grey feather in the middle of the house that is totally locked up. I'm the only person with the key. No windows open, no possibilities of feathers coming into the house, no birds present. Do you think if there was a grey bird in the house, it would be flapping around frantically because it wanted to get out? But no, there was this one very long, perfect grey feather in the spot where he passed away.
Oh my God.
And he used to wear grey. He used to wear grey all the time, very beige, very grey. And I'm like, thank you, Dad.
Oh, I love that. Did you feel like chills when you saw it? Were you just like, oh my God?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because Dad was very private about his spirituality and his religious beliefs and so forth. So he never really talked about anything. So for him to leave me a grey feather, I'm like, thank you. I know you believe in this stuff now.
Yes.
Do you have any other memorable paranormal experiences that you would like to share with our listeners today?
Sure. I have a few. I can give one about animals and another about mediumship if you're interested in both of those.
That would be great. I love hearing everybody's stories because everyone has a different perspective of how they occur, how they happen, what they experience and how they experience it. So it's really great for our listeners to get a broad view.
Yeah. So I had my dog and cat who've sadly since passed, Peanut and Simba, and they were the same color and the same size and they were just obsessed with each other. So everyone called them the twins. And if I saw like one of them out of the corner of my eye, or they were just running past, or they were cuddled under something, I couldn't tell right away which one was which because they were so similar looking, even if they were two different species. And Simba passed about a year before Peanut. I think it was just so hard for the two to be apart, and I'm sitting on my bed working. No big deal. I just see Peanut out of the corner of my eye run around the corner. I look up, but Peanut hadn't run around the corner. She was sitting on my bed. If you remember, I said I could never tell the two of them apart. So I was like, oh my God. And I'd already started studying all this. This was after losing my dad. And then to add to it, Peanut sat up, kind of barked the way she would excitedly whenever she did see Simba, and darted around the corner, just her tail going a mile a minute in this exact same area I'd been looking. That was pretty
fascinating. Fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
We are so similar. As you're sharing your experiences, I'm getting these little memories coming up of having had experiences with visiting friends and then leaving, and they walk me to the car. And as I'm talking to them, in my mind's eye behind them, quite often I'll see a cat or a dog. And this happened to one friend of mine. And I said to her, "Have you ever have a German Shepherd? Like really long, really thin, long tail, big head. The dog was following you." And she said, "Yes." And he died about 10 to 15 years ago, and he's still following her around. And I only saw him for maybe 4 seconds, but it was so vivid. She felt really comforted by the fact that the dog had shown itself to me so that I could say, "He's still here with you. He's still following you around. You know, he's still watching over you."
I got chills. I love that. That's so encouraging, especially as someone who sometimes questions this still. And I have a bunch of animals that I just miss so much. So when you hear those stories, it's really hard to dispute. How do you explain that? You can't,
Well, you
So
can't. And it's the same when my dad used to play with, we had a little orange dog called Dilly. Loved the tennis ball. Crazy, crazy, crazy. Always chasing a ball in the house, outside the house. My dad would sit in a particular chair and throw the ball against the wall. Dilly would go and catch it or fetch it, take it back. They'd do the same process over and over again. And when Dad passed away, Dilly would go and get her green tennis ball and either bounce it off the wall where he used to throw it or drop it and then kind of look up as if to say, "Well, I can see you. Are you going to throw my ball?" They kind of believe, but they don't want to believe. Poppy was just visiting, and Dilly could see, because animals are sort of very psychically open.
I think animals really see other dimensions that we don't. I mean, we literally know that they hear frequencies and see frequencies that we can't, but they seem to see and hear things interdimensionally, see consciousness from the other side. Most of us, I don't want to say none of us, but most of us don't most of the time.
No, that's right. And people are frightened of it. They don't want to trust that gut instinct that tells them not to drive home that way, go that way, but they go the other way and have a car accident. And they never kind of think, well, I actually got told to go that way and I doubted it. I trust my intuition more than 100%. If I'm getting that strong feeling I need to go a particular time or to go a particular direction or not to see a particular person that day, I just go, right, you're telling me that there's something about that interaction or that experiences that is not necessary, or it's going to be negative, or it's going to be detrimental in some way. I honour that. It's a shame that more people don't follow that intuitive sense that we all have.
It's true. I agree. It's like a superpower. If you can start teaching yourself to listen to it, it's like a hack. And it's also just so much more love because you get to have more of your loved ones. I mean, they're always around you, it seems, but you get to communicate and engage with them and get the benefits that they're trying to share with you and their wisdom and being like, "Hey, don't go down that road," or, "You know what? Don't go on that date. That person's not so nice." Or maybe that's a better job interview. It's like all different degrees of ways that you can communicate with them from what I'm learning, from drastic things, again, like don't get in the car now, to, hey, go to that like bakery instead because there might be like a job opportunity, or like a cute guy is going to be at the table next to you and maybe that's someone who will be the one, which, I mean, those are very important things too. I'm not going to say those are mild, but they're not as drastic as don't get in the car. So, I mean, once you can get those communications, I just think it's like life at the next level. I mean, I'm working on it. Don't ask me how to do it. I'm just trying and not that great at it yet, but that's what I'm learning. And I see it with my friends that are mediums. So trust and learning, and it's sort of like learning, for what I'm starting to understand, to feel, is that information what it means, what's it saying, which for some of us it's easy, some of us like me not so easy, but I'm working on it. I wonder if it is innate in all of us and we're told it's turned off when we're children because we're told it's not true. That'd be a study I'd love to delve into more.
So do you have any other paranormal experiences that you would like to share with us today?
Yeah, the last one I can share is based on mediumship. And now mediumship, there, from what I started to study about it, there's a whole history. If you go back to the 1800s, early 1900s, the Society for Cyclical Research, the SPR, and the ASPR, the American Society for Cyclical Research, and apparently there are branches all over the world. But the most current studies are primarily being conducted by the Windbridge Institute, Dr. Julie Beischel and Mark Bacuzzi, and they do up to quintuple blinded studies on mediums. And, I won't use our time to talk about all the studies because you can go to their website. The Forever Family Foundation, where I volunteer, certifies mediums, showing that they can get accurate information under really strict controls where they can't cold read you, meaning they can't read signals from looking at you. They don't have any of your information. They have to get accurate and specific, because you can get accurate information. Did you lose a grandmother and she loved you and she used to bake cookies and loved your grandfather? Okay, that's pretty general and it's probably true. You want to get specific. Was her name this? She did this for work. She went before your grandfather and he was really lonely and she used to buy him green socks. That's now accurate and specific. Another researcher, Dr. Jeff Tarrant, scans the brains of mediums and shows fascinating brainwave activity. But, this is all stuff you can find online. So again, I won't go into all the science behind that. I'll talk about some of my personal experience. So along with getting just some remarkable medium readings. And when I get medium readings, I take precautions. I give a fake name. Sometimes I'll give my real first name because it's Liz, but then with a fake last name because Liz is a very common name. Liz, Elizabeth, I'll do variations of it with a different last name. I disguise everything, have a friend pay, all of the above. So I was getting phenomenal medium readings, not all of them. So some were terrible. So if you've had a terrible medium reading, don't give up. Don't lose hope. Now, that being said, just started volunteering for the Forever Family Foundation, and they had an event, and it was my first one. And it was the first time I met their mediums, some who've become some of my really close friends today. It was the first time I met my mentors, the founders of Forever Family Foundation, who've been second parents to me. Sadly, Fran Ginsburg, who passed, who was a second mom to me, and then her husband, Bob Ginsburg. They've just been rocks and parents and wonderful people. It was my first time meeting this group. And this was at a weekend in 2016, and it was called the Afterlife and Mediumship Convention. And for the last night, the closing ceremony, people could attempt to give medium readings, and the mediums, there was a panel of 10 of them or something, and they were going to give people advice and tips. And you could go on different tracks that weekend. There were 3 different levels of developing your mediumship abilities, and then one track for I'm in grief and I lost somebody. Now, I don't have abilities. I had a loss. I was on the I lost somebody track, and I'd already just started volunteering, so they kind of knew who I was, and they knew I was super skeptical. And so at the closing dinner, joking around, Bob Ginsburg was like, Liz, why don't you get up and try to give readings? So I was like, haha. And then I was like, you know what? This thought they're really amazing parapsychologist. And if any of your listeners don't know him, look up Lloyd Arbach. That's Lloyd with 1 L. He does phenomenal parapsychology and parapsychological research. And I had just taken a class on developing your mediumship or developing your psychic abilities. And we also learned about cheating and cold reading, know how to avoid it and what was involved. And he actually also is a mentalist, because cold reading doesn't have to be unethical if you're being honest that it's stage magic. If you're going to a party and someone's like, I'm a psychic, and it's a fun party and they're giving you fun, general information, it's really unethical if they're claiming abilities and then tying it into grief or trying to upsell you $300 candles to clear your energy. I mean, those are just, I think it's important people hear about that, because that's just so wrong. So I was like, okay, I was like, why don't I get up and practice a cold reading? So I felt funny physically. I felt like all these waves moving around me and moving through me. And I was just like, oh, these are neurons of my brain. I've been feeling a little funny all weekend like that. And I just assumed, because I had been in deep, deep grief, in bed a lot, really antisocial. And suddenly I was around all these people. I assumed it was neurons of my brain healing and physiologically starting to rebalance after such a horrible trauma and a long time in bed processing. So I didn't think much of it. And so I go up and I go to this one medium. And she was the only one I sort of knew at this point, this woman, Laura, and I'd read her books. So I was like, oh, I'll just like give her a reading off of her book and it'll be funny. So I started to try to give one, but like she also talks about personal stuff in her book and loss. And I was like, oof, I'm not going to make a joke of someone's loss. I was trying to think of really light, funny topics. So I just like my mind went blank. It was like I kept trying to think of things to say. It was like my mind went completely blank. Don't know why I did this, but I walked over to this other medium, Joe Scheel, and I just started talking. It was like I started feeling all the waves congeal, and I feel all these like vibrating waves all go to my chest and start like congesting in my chest and exploding and exploding. I was like, okay, this is so weird. This is what I'm feeling. Did someone die of a heart attack? He's like, yes. Then I felt them all like move up to my head and start like congealing and exploding in one spot in my head. I was like, this is what I'm feeling. Is this a brain tumor? I was like, no, wait, with the exploding, it must be an aneurysm. And he's like, yes. And then I just like things would just pop into my mind. I was like, does Christmas mean something, but something really important to your family and different than regular Christmas? He was like, yes. And just, I like said certain initials. I was like, was this like your grandmother's initials? He's like, no, those are my kids' initials. Those are my kids' initials, though. His kids are still living. It was just so weird because not only was it accurate, but it was like I had all these sensations that was backing up what was coming into my mind. And I never quite felt like this. And I felt all these waves. And then a few years later, Laura was like, oh, by the way, you got stuff that was not in my book. I was like, no, I didn't. Well, she said it that night. I thought she was like joking around with me. I was like, shut up, like stop. But like even just this year, she's like, Liz, no, you got information. I'm like, I can't wrap my mind around that I did that. And then I did it another time in a mediumship class. And it's just remarkable. And it's like all these sensations accompany it. And I've been able to do it a couple times. And I think it shows if I can do it, anyone can communicate to an extent. It sort of changed my whole approach. It like I went from like one level to another in terms of my ability to research, in terms of my thinking there was something real going on, which helped my grief and helped me be able to communicate this more to other people. So that was my paranormal personal experience mediumship story, which it was crazy.
Yeah, but you trusting it. You were absolutely trusting what was coming through and you were sharing it. People experience their psychic abilities in different ways. Some see, some hear, some feel, some know, some smell, some taste things. I'm primarily a feeler. So I feel the energy of people, of places. I was going to ask you about psychometry, which is holding items and picking up energy. So I worked on a table. You're going to love this. Because I do a lot of energy clearing remotely. I had a friend go, my husband's father has passed away and he's left us a hue and pine table. It has this beautiful smell and it's very highly prized in Tasmania, Australia, probably worldwide. Anyway, so she sends me a photo of this table and she's like, I like this table, but there's something not right about it. It feels odd, it feels uncomfortable, I don't know what it is. When I looked at the photo, because I pick up energy from holding items or looking at photos, I won't go through everything that was attached to it, but there were a lot of negative emotional imprints, distress and sadness and grief. But what got me was I saw a very angry, middle-aged or slightly older, 50-plus aged man banging his hand on the table and the wood vibrating. And it was the weirdest thing, but I thought, what has that got to do with the table? But I trusted it and I sat with it. And when I conveyed the information, which I won't share because it was a little bit graphic, when I conveyed this information to the lady about what I found, what I've cleared from the table, this other information came through. Did this man pass away of a heart attack or some sort of heart issue? I said, because his face was so red. Like I couldn't describe his face, whether he had blue eyes or brown hair, but I saw this really red, angry face as he was banging his hand on this table. All this information came from a photo of a table sitting in a garage. And I only know this lady as a client. I've met her once in person. I don't know her as a friend. She hasn't shared family history. But she said, yeah, this man died of a heart attack. And I said, I can see why, from all the energetic imprints that were left in the table, but also through that visual of him banging his hand on the table. I can still see it in my mind now. So if we're all open to being aware of what we're shown, what we see, what we hear, what we feel, we would get so much more information in this reality that could help us and help other people.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And that table story is amazing. It's so remarkable. It's like what I always come to is stories like that, and the ones I shared and the ones so many of your guests have shared. It's like, where is this information stored? And I think once we answer that, we will have such a key to the universe. It's obviously stored somewhere, and it's stored in some conscious, alive way, and it is able to communicate and interact with us in some way we don't yet understand.
If I can get a little bit weird here, I explained it to the client as the table wanted to share this information with me. That's what I was picking up, is that the table needed the detrimental emotions, that what I call trauma imprints is when I see what happens on an item or to an item. The table needed that to be released. So then it's free of all that energetic build-up. Now, I don't have any quantitative ways of measuring what I found in that table, but it's just a random piece of furniture that a lady sent me a photo of, and I picked up what was there. So she will notice the difference when I see her next week, and I'll ask her, how does the table feel in your home now? You know? And it'll be interesting to see whether she's noticed a difference in it.
It's so fascinating. And I think it just explains some different way information is stored too. Like, it's stored in tables. There's, as I mentioned, Lloyd Auerbach, he talks about hauntings versus apparitions. And in one of them, and I'm going to mix it up, like I have the quote so known, I have like the notes in it, but I'm going to mix it up. So I'm not going to say which is which because I'll have it wrong. But in one of them, like haunting versus apparition, one of them is like what we think of as ghosts, like a consciousness that passed away of someone and we can interact with it. And the other is like a recording. So it's like the difference between like us on Zoom now versus if I was watching a recording of an interview on Zoom. And both information stored both ways, and one it can interact, and one when it's just a recording and there's no consciousness, it's like it'll be like you'll see people report like a spirit walking along the same path every night at the same time for like 5 seconds, and it seems like that's actually like a recording of who this person was, and it's not their consciousness. So I mean, we don't know enough about that to really know, but it's fascinating.
Would you like to share with us about your book and your podcast?
Certainly. So I have a book on kind of how, from when my dad first got sick to, how I began to investigate if there was scientific evidence of an afterlife. And it's called WTF Just Happened: A Sciencey Skeptic Explores Grief, Healing, and Evidence of an Afterlife. And I'm in the process of finishing up book number 2, which kind of picks up where book number 1 left off, because book number 1 ends in about 2018. And then my podcast, I interview a lot of the people who've had fascinating experiences, who've changed my mind, like the researchers, psychic mediums. And that is called WTF Just Happened: All About the Afterlife, No Woo. And it's on all podcast apps. And I also host intimate science and spirituality dinners, or they can be breakfast, brunches, like events, I should say, intimate events of up to about 10 people. We can talk about the flexibility on that. And they're both in person and virtual. And I give a talk on the science, and a medium gives readings. And you can find all of this on my website at WTFJustHappened.net. And I'm also very active on Instagram and TikTok. So you can link to those through my website.
That's great. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Liz. I've loved listening to all your scientific information and your paranormal experiences.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always so much fun to share my stories and get to learn a bit about your story too.
I can't help but share. It's just in my nature to I don't know, I think it helps make it relatable for people. So I
I do
just tell
too.
stories all the time. I can't help myself. Thank you,
I
Liz.
think
Thank you
the
so
more
much.
we hear, yeah, the better. The more of these stories we hear, the better it is. So thank you.
So in episode 53, we're exploring the witching hour. We're going to look at what is it? Is it real? Is it relevant? And if you do believe in it, how does it affect you? And I'm going to share some of my personal experiences and also some other people's paranormal occurrences that they've had happen after dark between midnight and 4 a.m. So thank you for joining me today. And don't forget, if you want to share a paranormal experience just with myself, or you would like me to share one of your experiences through my podcast, you can do a voice recording, or you can write out your experience and I will read it exactly as you have written. You can email me at spiritualbeing44@gmail.com. And for information on paranormal house clearing, you can visit my website, Spiritual Being. You will find the address in the description box. And I look forward to sharing this spooky space again with you next week. And remember, life is perfectly paranormal.